Hello everyone, this is Savannah Bekowski, Project Assistant at the Syracuse University Environmental Finance Center. On behalf of the Environmental Finance Center Network and the Utah Department of Environmental Quality, I'd like to welcome you to our webinar entitled, How to Navigate the SRF Program in Utah. To give you all of an idea of where others on the webinar are tuning in from, we have prepared this map. You can see that we have attendees spread throughout the country. Thanks to you all for joining us today. This session is one of several webinars conducted by the Environmental Finance Center Network for the Smart Management for Small Water Systems projects. The EFCN provides training and technical assistance to small public water systems in all 50 states and 5 territories to help local water systems achieve and maintain compliance with the Safe Drinking Water Act. And here you can see the various centers that make up the Environmental Finance Center Network. You can see that we have centers spread across the country from New York to Kansas to California. And here you can see the areas of expertise that the EFCN focuses on. Workshops, trainings, and direct assistance are provided on fiscal planning and rate setting, asset management, energy use and efficiency, meeting regulatory compliance, multi-funding coordination, communication and decision-making, water loss reduction, working with other water systems, financing, funding programs, and managing small utilities in drought. The EFCN also has a small systems water blog. You can learn more about water finance and management through this blog. Blog posts feature lessons learned from our trainings and technical assistance, descriptions of available tools, and small system success stories. You will have an opportunity to subscribe to the blog at the end of the webinar. In addition to the workshops, direct technical assistance and webinars, as part of the Smart Management for Small Water Systems projects, we are also creating a table that lists the major funding sources for drinking water infrastructure projects for each state and territory. Here's how you can access those tables. From the home page, go to Funding Sources by State under the Resources tab, and then click on Funding Sources by State. This will take you to a map of the country. If you click on the state where you are interested in, you will find a PDF table of the relevant funding sources for drinking water infrastructure for that state. The table looks like the image on the left of the slide. For each funding program, it includes the name of the program, a short description, and contact information for someone who works with the program. Now, before I turn the presentation over to our speakers for today, I have 2 quick polling questions for you. The first polling question is, what kind of water or sewer utility do you represent? Please take the next 10 seconds to answer if you are a for-profit municipality, a not-for-profit, a special purpose district, or you are not from a water or sewer utility. And about 5 seconds left to input your answers. Closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. As you can see, a majority are not from a water or sewer utility, but next is from a municipality. The next polling question is, what size water and or sewer system does your utility operate by number of people served? Please take about 10 seconds to input your answer. You can choose from very small, small, medium, large or very large, or again, not from a water or sewer utility. And about another 5 seconds to input your answers. Getting ready to close the polls in 3, 2, 1. We have very small or not from a water or sewer utility. At this point, I would like to turn the presentation over to our speakers for today. For today's session, we have Ken Bousfield, Division Director for the Division of Drinking Water at the Utah Department of Environmental Quality, Michael Grange, Construction Assistant Section Manager at the Utah Department of Environmental Quality, and Stacy Isaac Barazer, Senior Project Director with the Environmental Finance Center at the University of North Carolina in Chapter Hill. I thank all the presenters for being here today. Stacy, please take it away.
Great, thank you, Savannah. Is my screen up here?
Yes, it is. Excellent.
All right. Yes, and hello, everyone. I think it's good afternoon is appropriate for folks in Utah. So as Savannah mentioned, I am with the Environmental Finance Center at UNC. I am in a satellite office actually in the Atlanta metro area in Georgia, and it's afternoon where I am as well. So this slide is telling you a little bit about my Environmental Finance Center. As Savannah mentioned, there are several EFCs across the country, and she is with the one in Syracuse, but I am with the UNC Center. And like the other EFCs, we try to answer the how do you pay for it question when it comes to environmental projects. So it's important to us how a project is financed. We do this by, we have applied research, we do teaching and outreach, and we do some program design and evaluation. We have a mixture at any one point in time of students that work on some of our projects, getting some hands-on practical environmental finance experience. So that's a little bit about our center at the EFC. In terms of what we're going to talk about on the webinar today, I'm going to share with you the objectives at this point. So we're going to look at understanding the background of the state and federally funded state revolving fund programs in Utah. We're going to look at what types of projects are eligible for SRF funding. We're going to try to understand some of the requirements related to federal funding in general, as well as looking at some of the important timelines and processes for SRF applications in Utah. And then finally, we will get to some tips on how you may improve your SRF application score, perhaps. So I'll give you some resources for sort of setting your application apart, hopefully. In terms of some background on loans in general, why borrow? So some folks have a natural tendency, or maybe they've been taught that maybe we should just kind of save up and pay for projects as we go along. Well, I will say that water infrastructure projects particularly lend themselves to the debt market, to borrowing, because water infrastructure tends to have a long, useful life. Also, amortizing the loan over the life of the equipment, in the case of water infrastructure, allows your customers to benefit from improvements to the system now and pay for them over time. Also, it allows future customers to pay for some of these infrastructure improvements that they'll be benefiting from at that point in time. Sort of also making the case for the debt market is when you need cash now, when you cannot afford to save up and pay for it. We're talking about large infrastructure projects here in some cases, and smaller systems especially will never really, in most cases, it's not practical for you to save up the money to do these big infrastructure projects. Lenders consider different criteria when they're trying to determine who they're going to lend money from, for instance, or whether to loan money in the first place. They look at your credit worthiness, and they look at your ability to repay the debt that they are considering issuing to you. And so we'll look at the process for Utah, and again, at the end, we'll look at measuring your credit worthiness, for instance, and some of the different factors that help to assess whether you will be able to repay the debt. So in particular, in the state of Utah, these are some of the things or the factors that the state is looking at. They're looking at the median adjusted gross income. They're looking at the average monthly water bill for your utility, the project cost per connection. So they're kind of evaluating the cost of the project on a per connection basis. They're looking at system contribution as well as special incentives. So in Utah, special incentives could include things like existing capital facilities, replacement funds, whether or not the project involves regionalization, so more than one water system, and a rate structure that encourages water conservation. It's not the wettest part of the country, and so water conservation is important to the state. When we talk about this concept of debt or the debt market, there are really two major kinds of debt. So we can break the debt market down into two types, if you will, loans and bonds. In Utah, because of the state constitution, from what we understand, political subdivisions are not allowed to take out a loan if it goes over one fiscal year. And we'd be happy to answer more questions about that. We have Michael Grange coming up, who is the guy who actually administers the program in Utah. But if you are a political subdivision and you're looking at a loan for over 1 year, then you have to bond for these types of longer-term projects. So in Utah, the loans for the SRF programs go mainly to the private water systems rather than the municipal systems. A loan, if we kind of break down loans a little bit more, loans are typically from a bank, but they can also be from a government-sponsored program, such as the SRF program that we're talking about today. Wanted to give you a little bit more background, sort of a higher level view of the State Revolving Fund program. So actually in Utah, there are 2 State Revolving Fund programs, or SRFs. Well, taking a step back, the federal program, there's both the Clean Water SRF and the Drinking Water SRF. We are going to focus more on the Drinking Water SRF for the purposes of this webinar. The Clean Water SRF is sort of its sister program and is traditionally for wastewater and other water quality type projects. The SRF program nationally represents a federal-state partnership, and there are some misnomers here because even though it's called the State Revolving Fund, the main SRF that we'll be talking about today is run by the state of Utah. So the way the SRF programs work is that the federal government provides a capitalization grant. The state, each state across the country puts in a 20% match on these federal funds, and then the programs are administered by staff in the specific state, and we have a couple of the staff people from Utah that are going to talk to you in a little bit here. So again, honing in on the Drinking Water SRF, we'll see in terms of general background, that program was established by the 1996 amendments to the Safe Drinking Water Act, or SDWA, sorry. All 50 states in the country, as well as Puerto Rico, have a Drinking Water SRF. Congress actually is the entity that appropriates funding for the Drinking Water SRF. EPA then awards this capitalization grant to each state based on a needs survey called the Drinking Water Infrastructure Needs Survey and Assessment. So that helps the federal government to decide on how big a slice of the pie, in other words, Utah, for instance, will get. The bulk of the money from this capitalization grant goes into a revolving fund, and it provides loans and other authorized assistance to water systems for their eligible infrastructure projects. So the allotments between states is based on this needs survey, like I mentioned. In Utah, they were allotted like 1 400% of the federal fiscal pie for 2014 through 2017. And so the needs survey process is currently underway, and it would determine the allotment for the state of Utah for the years 2018 through 2021. So that's just kind of how the federal process works. Savannah, my slide is not advancing here for some reason. I will try again.
Not a problem. If you need me to take over and to continue transitioning.
Okay, let's see. Okay, there we go. Has it moved forward to the diagram, Savannah? Okay, hopefully your version of the webinar has moved on, like mine. So this is just a graphic that's showing what the SRF program looks like. So it's basically a graphic of the words that I had on the previous slide. So again, up here you will see the federal capitalization grant comes into the state provides its 20% match. Sometimes there's bonding going on depending on the state involved. And the main thing is these low interest loans that go out to the actual individual water utilities in the state. And these are generally loans, not grants. So they are repaid, and that sort of keeps this body here, this capital, in play all the time for future loans. Okay, so that is in a nutshell what the large sort of federal/state capitalization process looks like for the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. And we're going to start looking at eligibility here for Utah and the SRF programs. And at this point, I'm going to pass the mic over here to Michael Grange with the Division of Drinking Water in Utah to go through the next few slides. Michael?
Thank you, Stacy. Stacy's already mentioned this a little bit, but here at the Division of Drinking Water, we provide oversight for two different programs. One is a federal program and one is a state program. It can get a little confusing because we call both of them state revolving fund programs. So we have a federal state revolving fund and a state revolving fund. And these programs, while they have some similarities, they also have some significant differences. So as we move on to the next slide, we'll start talking a little bit about the state program. Is it not moving again, Stacey? There we go. There we go. Thank you. The state program was actually established by our legislature in the early to mid-1980s. Funds for the program come from an allocation of the state sales tax. We at the Division of Drinking Water receive approximately $3.5 million a year from the sales tax revenue, and that money goes for the various aspects of our program, the majority of which goes to, as you can see there, political subdivisions or other political entities of the state, such as municipalities, water districts, or special service districts. It could also go to a county or other governmental entity. The next slide talks more about, or starts talking about the federal program. The federal program was established, as Stacey mentioned, by Congress in 1996 when they amended the Safe Drinking Water Act. Funding for this program comes from a congressional appropriation to EPA and then to the states in the form of that capitalization grant that Stacey mentioned. Historically, Utah has received about $8 to $9 million a year from this capitalization grant, and we use that mainly for construction projects. As you can see here, those entities that are available for financial assistance through the federal program is somewhat broader than the state program. We are allowed to fund publicly owned systems, privately owned systems, or nonprofit, non-community systems such as homeowners associations, small restaurants that have their own water system, church camps and scout camps and things of that nature. The next slide, we start talking about projects for which we can provide financial assistance. These are the eligible projects that we have. We can provide funding for treatment, transmission and distribution, source, storage, consolidation of water systems or regionalization. We can help you fund a new system that's being created in an area that doesn't have a system at present. And we can also fund green projects. Green projects, the definition for those includes both water efficiency, such as replacing leaky pipes, or it could be installing meters and a SCADA system to help you better manage your water flow. Green projects also include energy efficiency projects where you're looking at improving your operations to save energy and prevent undue emissions of greenhouse gases in your water process. The next slide, we're going to start talking about some of the advantages that the SRF program may offer you when you look at funding your infrastructure project. And one of the things that we look at to begin with on the next slide, we talk a lot about a disadvantaged community. And this is our definition of a disadvantaged community that we have written in our rule. Basically, what it says is that your median adjusted gross income will be less than or equal to 80% of the state's median adjusted gross income for any given year. Or your annual water bill for your residents exceeds your local median adjusted gross income, exceeds 1.75% of that local median adjusted gross income, sorry. So we talk a lot about disadvantaged communities and how they fit into our program. The next advantage that we have on the next slide, we talk about lower interest rates. Typically, our interest rates are well below the market rate. Throughout 2016, our interest rates averaged anywhere from 1.5% to 2.5%. We use as a base rate the most current revenue bond buyer index, which as of November 3rd of this year was at 3.44%. We are also able to charge a loan origination fee of 1% on any loans. However, here's the first benefit for the disadvantaged communities. They are not required to pay that origination fee because that would then pose somewhat of a hardship on an already disadvantaged community, so we don't charge that 1% fee. The next benefit on the next slide, we target small systems with these loans. Typically, we've found that the smaller systems are less able to provide their own funding for some of the needed infrastructure improvements that they have to continue compliance with the Safe Drinking Water Act. And in addition to that, a minimum of 15% of all of our funding that comes in through the federal program must go to those systems that serve fewer than 10,000 people. The next slide, we also fund the green infrastructure projects that I mentioned earlier, which include water efficiency, including the meters, and energy efficiency projects. Every year, Congress has the option to determine whether or not the Green Project Reserve will be a requirement of the federal SRF program. For the last few years, they have not required green projects. However, we are encouraged as a state to include green projects to the extent possible, and also to provide some level of subsidy to those water systems that do undertake these green projects. Next, we're talking about principal forgiveness. On the federal side, we call it principal forgiveness because we can't call it grant. Otherwise, if we did try and call it a grant, then you as the recipient would be under the same regulations and requirements that we are as a state to qualify for a grant. So to make it easier for you, we've termed it principal forgiveness rather than grant, but it's basically a grant. In order to get principal forgiveness, you must qualify as a disadvantaged community, which again means that your local MAGI is less than or equal to 80% of the state MAGI, or your average water bill is greater than 1.75% of your local MAGI. And the level of principal forgiveness that we offer basically depends on the financial condition that your system is in. We try to the best of our ability to maintain your water bill at that 1.75% of local MAGI, which is the affordability factor that our Drinking Water Board established several years ago. And so as we get your applications for funding, we look at the total project cost, and then we try and mix and match interest rates and level of principal forgiveness so that we can maintain that average water bill right around that 1.75% of your local MAGI, although it's not always possible to do that. One thing about that MAGI, if you as a water system believe that your MAGI, which is reported by the State Tax Commission, is incorrect, you can commission a third-party income survey for your users and use that survey to identify whether or not that MAGI information is correct. And we can, as a drinking water, or as a Division of Drinking Water staff to the Drinking Water Board, we can recommend that the board consider that income survey rather than the MAGI data provided by the Tax Commission. Some of the requirements that the federal SRF program has, and there are a few that we need to discuss because they play a pretty significant role in what you as water systems and the engineering community that serves you need to be aware of. So the first thing that we talk about on the next slide is the terms of the loan. The repayment period must begin no later than 1 year after you complete your project. And the reason that we give you that 1 year is so that you have an opportunity as a water system to, if necessary, implement a rate increase so that you'll be bringing in enough revenue to meet your new debt obligations. We have a 20-year term, and basically that also starts after the completion of the project. You have 20 years to repay the loan, And again, the disadvantaged community gets some benefit here because we can extend that repayment period to 30 years, as long as that repayment period does not exceed the expected design life of the infrastructure that you're building. The next one that we need to talk about is the DavisBacon Act. In 2009, under the American Reinvestment and Recovery Act, Congress decided to make the DavisBacon Act wage rules apply to all drinking water SRF projects. And since that time, they have maintained that requirement, and it looks like that's going to be a permanent addition to the drinking water SRF program. So all contractors on your projects need to make sure that they are meeting the DavisBacon Act wage requirements. Those requirements are found on that website that you'll see the link there, wdol.gov. When you get to that page, you'll select the appropriate state and county. For us, it's, of course, Utah. And each county or each group of counties does have its own set of wage requirements. All of our drinking water projects are under the construction type heavy, and then you'll click on search, and that will bring up a page that shows you the wage determinations for the different types of people that are working on your project, whether it be backhoe operators, truck drivers, people working in the trenches, etc. They will all be covered there. And if you in the engineering community, especially, if you pull that page up and you have any questions about a particular type of vocation that's working on a project, please don't hesitate to call, and we can discuss that and help you pick the proper wage determination for that vocation. American Iron and Steel on the next slide. Basically, this requirement says that all iron and steel products used in construction, where that construction is funded through federal dollars, must be produced in the United States. There is a list of items, the Q&A document there that you see towards the bottom of that slide. There is a list of actual infrastructure that will qualify for this American Iron and Steel provision. Waivers may be requested and may be granted for an exception when necessary. A couple of things that I'm aware of for your information. We did one project where the well casing was not available in the size that this particular community wished to drill, and we were able to obtain a waiver for them to use foreign-made well casing because they couldn't find the size that they needed. On that EPA website, there is another list. I don't have it here on this slide, but if you need to be directed to that, please call me and I can help you find that on the EPA's webpage. But they do have a list of those exceptions that have been, or the waivers that have been granted. So you can get an idea of the types of waivers that are available that have previously been approved, and those that have not been approved. To help you make your choices and your decisions as you are thinking about your projects and designing and specifying different pieces of equipment. The next page, Disadvantaged Business Enterprises, or DBE. This used to be known as the MeBe-Weebie provision, minority or women-owned business. These are the ones that are typically included in the disadvantaged business definition. Basically what this provision says is that these types of business enterprises must at least be given an opportunity to bid on any federally funded project. The assistance recipient, you as the loan recipient, and your engineering firms that you hire must show a good faith effort to allow DBEs an opportunity to bid on these projects. There is no requirement to hire the DBE if they don't meet your exact qualifications or if their bid is not acceptable. You simply must show that good faith effort to meet the requirements of this provision. The next thing that we need to discuss with you is reporting. And for the federal program, there are three major areas to report. One is the Disadvantaged Business Enterprises, the other is American Iron and Steel, and the third is the DavisBacon requirements. First, for disadvantaged business reporting, there are two types of reports that are required. The first set of reports comes in with your actual bid documents. We are required to collect information that shows that you as the recipient did in fact make that good faith effort to allow as many DBEs as possible to bid on your particular project. There has also been an annual reporting feature that shows how you then employed these disadvantaged business enterprises if in fact you did hire them to work on your project. If you did not hire any DBEs, you simply report none on that report and submit it to us here at Drinking Water, and we compile all those reports and send it on to EPA. For American Iron and Steel, what is required is that you as the loan recipient request and have delivered to you documentation from all of your suppliers that any iron and steel that they have supplied is in fact made in the USA. These letters have to show the exact item that was purchased and brought to the job site. They show the manufacturing location within the United States that made that particular item, and then they must be signed by a responsible official of that manufacturing entity. These letters must be kept on file, and they must be available for us to review when we come out to do our construction inspections, and they also must be available for EPA or EPA's Office of Inspector General to review if they should choose your project for an American Iron and Steel audit. The third major area for reporting is the DavisBacon wage requirements. And again, there are a couple of different documents that are required for this reporting. One is a copy of certified timesheets. These must be submitted to you on a regular basis and must be certified by the contractor that they meet the DavisBacon wage requirements. The other reporting requirement is actually carried out by either you as the loan recipient or your consulting engineer, and that is that you are required to visit the job site within 2 weeks of a contractor or a subcontractor showing up to do work on the job site and randomly interviewing a specific number of employees of that particular contractor or subcontractor to ascertain whether or not they are actually paid the prevailing wages that are required by the DavisBacon Act. In both of these cases, the timesheets, although they're provided by the contractor, there is a specific format that they should follow. And if you have any questions on that, we can help you find examples of that format. And the employee interviews are also recorded on a specific document, a specific form that we can help you find to make sure that you're meeting the requirements of that reporting. The last one that we need to talk about with respect to the federal program is project signage. And that is our next slide. This is a new requirement. It's only been around for a year or two, and it is required for all federally funded projects. There are a number of options that can be used to meet this requirement. The objective of the signage requirement is to enhance public understanding of the positive benefits of drinking water state revolving fund assistance. The signs should satisfy the overall objective of letting people know that this project is being funded through EPA, and also they want the signs to be practical. They should fit the project. They should not be overly expensive or require an overabundance of effort on your part. The state, we here at Drinking Water have been given the options and the ability to make sure this is fulfilled in different ways. Not every project requires or is expected to have the same type of sign as another project. So I'd like to hit the options real quick. The first option is, of course, the standard sign. You've seen these, I'm sure, especially on highway projects. They're usually a big 4x8 sheet, typically plywood with with the printing on the one side that says your tax dollars at work, and then who's funded the project, who's the contractor, and etc. These types of signs are usually better used, for example, for such highway projects, or where the project is next to a frequently traveled road. However, in remote locations or off-site, things that are way out, these signs aren't very effective, and they can be expensive. So EPA has determined that we should offer other options. And those other options include the list that you see there on your screen. You can put posters or flyers in a public place, either your town hall, the public library, any place where the public gathers in significant numbers. You can use newspaper or advertisements in a periodical. You can use an online sign on your community web page or other social media outlet, or you can use a press release. And in each of these cases, there are specific items that must be included on these signs, and this information is included with all of our authorization letters that are sent to our loan recipients. If you do have any questions, again, please let us know here at the division. We'd be happy to walk you through this requirement and help you determine which would be a more appropriate option for your particular project. And that's the gist of what is required for the federal program. Again, if you have any questions, please give us a call here at the division, and we'll be glad to work with you. And I'd like to turn it back to Stacy to talk about timelines and the SRF process.
Great. Thanks, Michael. So just a reminder again, sort of housekeeping, if you have questions, do send them into the question box, type them in, and Savannah is going to queue those up for us, and we'll have some time at the end for question and answer. And also, if she gets a good spot and it's really relevant to what we're talking about at a particular point in time, she may even interject it during the webinar. So do let us know if you have questions. This is, I think, one of the key objectives here is to give you guys some time to interface directly with Michael, for instance, who manages the program in the state of Utah. So looking at the SRF funding timelines and processes, the first sort of concept that we wanted to talk about is this idea of an IUP, or an intended use plan. So this is one of the requirements from the federal government. Each state that's managing a drinking water SRF program has to develop this IUP. The IUP essentially describes how the state plans to use the money that it's going to be receiving. It includes a list of potential projects, and I have potential in italics there because there are times when a project is listed there that may not make it all the way to the funding process. So it leans more on the side usually of being comprehensive. The draft IUP must be posted for public comment, and there are different ways to do that, but we won't go into those details here. That's more for the SRF managers and administrators to work on. But you will have a chance as part of the public to comment on the draft IUP. And for you guys on the webinar today, folks developing projects, the most important thing I think about the IUP is that it includes this project priority list. And so we want to kind of hone in more on that list. So each application is scored. It receives priority points. And the way the scoring goes, obviously, the systems who have projects who have a higher priority score have the chance to be considered for assistance before the other projects with lower scores, okay? And the calculation is there on your screen right now. I pulled that right off of the Drinking Water website and the Division of Drinking Water website. And so we can show you where you can get more detail on that document. But that's the basic equation, if you will, that they use to score those projects. And this also is information that the Division of Drinking Water makes accessible, so you guys know the schedule for applying and how the whole process is going to work in terms of a timeline. So we're getting really close. Hopefully you can see my mouse. Today's the 14th, and for the 2006 round, the end of this week, we're kind of wrapping up this particular calendar or schedule, if you will. But I'm going to let Michael point out a few key things on this. This is available on the division's website, but there are a couple places that, we want to note. This is in St. George and this is in Layton. So I'm going to let Michael add any other comments he had about this particular schedule.
Yes, thank you, Stacy. If you'll notice on that furthest right-hand corner or column where it says DWB meeting, you'll notice that the Drinking Water Board meets about every other month. January, March, May, July, either the end of August or the first part of September, and then again in November. So our project priority list is constantly being upgraded and changed based on the number and types of applications that we get throughout the year. The column there on the furthest left, that's the cutoff date for the SRF applications to come in so that we have time for staff to run their calculations and do their financial evaluations and project evaluations in order to give the Drinking Water Board enough information for the board to make an informed decision about whether they're willing to provide financial assistance to this particular project. The SRF conference call, or the third column, each project when it comes in, staff will evaluate it and prepare a packet for the board to look at. That SRF conference call is actually a call with a subset of the board, 4 members of the board that are the Financial Assistance Committee. And this committee looks at these applications and decides whether they believe or not that they have enough information for the board to make a proper decision. And so if they don't think that we have enough information, they could table that project and ask staff to go back and get additional information before taking it to the board. If there is enough information they believe the board can make a good decision, then they authorize staff to take that particular application to that next board meeting. As you can see, the application cutoff date is approximately 2 months prior to the board meeting, and that will give us as staff enough time to prepare that information packet. The board meetings are typically held the second Friday of the month. The 2 exceptions typically are the meeting in St. George and the meeting in Layton, and those 2 meetings are held in conjunction with Rural Water Association of Utah conferences. It's just an offering by Rural Water Association for the board to come and be at their meeting, and it gives the board a chance to get out and be with some of the people and some of the systems that they've provided funding for or will be providing funding for in the future. It's just a good opportunity to get out and show the board what's going on outside of the Wasatch Front. So basically that's all I had for that Stacey. Okay. Another thing we look at here as we're going through the applications is the State Environmental Review process or the National Environmental Policy Act review process to make sure that environmental concerns are included in your application and in the process that you go through as a water system when you're looking to receive funding for a project. As you can see there are a number of different results that can come from this environmental review. The desired outcome for most of you is that categorical exclusion. Basically, that means that when we review that project with you, as we look over the different ways and means of building that project, that we can determine that there will be no appreciable impact to the environment from that project. In order to qualify for categorical exclusion, though, the project does need to meet certain requirements, both from the state environmental review process and from the NEPA process, and those requirements are spelled out in rule and in regulation. So we don't really have time to get into all that here, but please call us and let us walk you through that process and help you understand what categories of projects would qualify for that categorical exclusion. Then we have the environmental assessment. The environmental assessment can result in either a finding of no significant impact, or it could result also in a finding that there is the need for an environmental impact statement, which can take quite an extended period of time to complete. And then that process, the environmental impact statement process, will end in a record of decision. So I guess the thing that we're trying to convey here is that when you're looking at especially federal funding, please take into consideration the potential time frame that the environmental review process will take, and allow enough time to get through that process and still get your project done in a timely manner. The next thing we look at is the bonding process. Outside of the environmental review process, this is one that probably takes the next longest amount of time. There is a public notice and a public hearing requirement. The public hearing is typically held as part of a city council meeting or other public body meeting. This allows the public to be able to comment on the bond itself, any potential rate increases that may result as a consequence of taking on this additional debt. The governing body must first pass the parameters resolution to the bond, which basically is a resolution that establishes the upper limits that the bond can have, the upper limit of the amount borrowed, the upper limit of the interest rate, and the upper limit of the time to repay the loan or the bond. Then there is a time period between that parameters resolution and the bond resolutions, again, to allow further public comment, and then the actual bond resolution is passed by your governing body to allow you to then actually sell your bond to the Drinking Water Board and have the money put in your construction escrow account to begin your construction. The other thing that's involved with the process that we go through as we're preparing this information is the plan review process. Before we can actually close on the loan and buy the bond for your drinking water project, we must be able to review the plans and specifications for that project. These plans and specifications must be approved by the division before you go out for bid. When you submit your plans and specs to us, we do have 30 days to respond to allow us time to do a thorough review and make sure that things are in compliance with all of our drinking water rules. And again, we tell you this so that you can plan your schedule accordingly and understand that there are time schedules and time frames that must be met before you actually get the financial assistance to begin construction. Once we have approved those plans and specifications, we do also require that we receive a copy of the bid tabs outlining all of the bids that were received, as well as the detailed bid for the contractor that you choose to move forward with your project. The other thing that is required on all federal projects, on the next slide we see the capacity assessment worksheets. Oh, did we skip one? There we go. All right, capacity assessment worksheets. These worksheets are included with the drinking water application, or they're available directly from the website if you would like to just take a look at them and see what they are, and maybe even use them to help improve the capabilities of your water system. Basically what these capacity assessment worksheets do is ask you to answer specific questions about your water system, about the way that it's operated, the technical portion of it, how much water you pump, where your assets are, what condition they might be in. We also look at the managerial capacity, what type of system, what's the governing type of system that you are. Are you an HOA? Are you a private system? Are you a municipality? Things of that nature. We look at the financial conditions that your system has. We ask for your current budget as well as 4 years of projected budgets. We ask about your rates and your rate and collection ordinances and things of that nature. So there are the 3 different sections, and each section is a couple of pages long, so there are a number of questions that we ask that will allow us as staff, again, to evaluate the capacity or capabilities of your system and determine whether your system is viable or whether or not we need to work with you to help you gain sufficient capabilities to be a viable system that can provide a good supply of water to your residents as well as repay the debt that you may be incurring. So those are some other things that we look at as we go through our process here to prepare your application to take it to the Drinking Water Board. And there are other things that should be considered, and I'll turn it back to Stacy to go over those.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael. So this section of the webinar is pretty different from the first part, right? So we've kind of called this section Tips on How to Score Higher on Your SRF Application. And so Michael went over the first sort of tool that can be used that's Utah specific, that the state has put together, and you can find it at the URL here. But before we get more into different tips and tools that you can use, I think we have a couple questions, and we'll go ahead and take those right now. Savannah.
Thank you. So there was a question as to why the Revenue Bond Buyers Index for 2016 had a rate of 3.44% when the interest rate for the 2016 year was 1.5 to 2.5%.
That's a very specific question. Do we need to repeat that question, Michael?
No, I got that. Thank you. Yes, that's a great question. The reason that we do that and the reason that our interest rates are different is because we take a number of things into account as we look at your application. We do look at your median adjusted gross income. We look at your average monthly water bill. We look at water rates. We look at regionalization plans. We look at whether or not you have an existing capital facilities replacement fund. All these things that we look at, we assign a certain number of points to those particular items. And then those points go to reducing that interest rate from the base rate of the Revenue Bond Buyers Index down to the 1.5 to 2.5%. So it's kind of a black box calculation, if you will, but if you want further information on that, like I say, we don't really have time to go into it during this particular presentation, but I'd be happy to discuss those items with you and explain to you exactly how we go about reducing that interest rate down from the RBBI to the interest rate that we offer in our financial assistance packages.
Great. Well, and I want to stress or emphasize that we will not let this webinar end without sharing Michael's direct contact information. So you will have his email address and phone number for some of these follow-up, more specific questions if you like. Savannah, can we have the second question now, please?
Yes, and are these loans only available to private water companies in Utah?
Direct loans are available only to private water companies simply because of the way that the state constitution is written and only allows municipalities and political subdivisions to bond for these. It's pretty much the same thing. It's just a difference in how the loan is collateralized, basically. The private water company has to use as collateral some type of real property, either water rights or a piece of property owned by the water system. Whereas for a municipality in bonding, they're using the revenues or in some cases the general obligation bonding capabilities of the municipality to guarantee that the loan will be repaid.
Great. Well, on that note, I will I'll move on. I think that was an excellent answer, Michael. Very detailed. And I want to encourage folks to go ahead and type in the questions as they come to your mind into the question box. Savannah, again, is going to queue them up for us, and we'll get to them at a good stopping point. But don't wait till the end. You don't have to wait till the end to submit your questions. Hopefully your memory is good, but a lot of us might forget by the time the question and answer period comes up. So again, we encourage you to get your questions answered by submitting them. All right, so the next section, we want to start looking at some parameters or benchmarks So can you sleep at night? If you are managing a drinking water system, you probably have these questions keeping you awake at night. Is your system self-sufficient? Are you able to cover the debt service after paying for the daily operations of your system? What if the customers in your utility for some reason stop paying their bills? How long can you continue to operate this system, which by the way is a critical, it's a necessity for public health? Can your system meet its short-term obligations? And then how much of your system's expected life has already run out? How soon are you looking at replacing major parts of your facility or major pieces of equipment? So fortunately, there are some parameters or benchmarks that we can use for looking at some of these questions that might be giving us nightmares. All right, so the operating ratio, debt service coverage ratio, days cash on hand, current ratio, and asset depreciation are the ones that we're going to look at very briefly. And I wanted to mention this video as well. We're doing pretty well on time. We probably had the 11 minutes to show this video, but I will let you guys do that for homework. So you can take a look at this video on your own time. You click on that link here and you should be able to access it pretty easily. It was funded through some work that we did a couple years ago that the Water Research Foundation funded. But it is a good way to break down some of these financial ratios into everyday terms of a man driving a car and some of the things he would need to pay attention to in case he gets a flat tire, when he needs to put gas in the car and that kind of thing. We've had a lot of folks say that this 11-minute video is really digestible for the decision makers, so they like to show it at the board meeting, for instance. So it's a good way to break it down. So this is just another way of looking at the ratios that we're going to look at. Is your system self-sufficient? So that first question, can we take care of ourselves? The operating ratio is really a key way to look at that. It's probably the most basic ratio that you could look at for your system. And you can include depreciation there or you cannot, depending on the type of operating ratio you're calculating. At the bottom of the screen, you will see where you can read a little bit more about certain ratios. So the operating ratio is looking at, are you spending more than you're bringing in terms of revenue? All right, no, we don't want to be in the red there. We don't want to be spending more than we're bringing in. The next ratio answers the question, are you able to cover your debt service after paying for your day-to-day operations? Debt service coverage ratio, or you sometimes often see it written as DSCR. So this ratio is really important to someone who's giving you a loan. So the SRF program, for instance. And a good rule of thumb there is that the debt service coverage ratio should be greater than 1.25. It is just a rule of thumb. It depends on the particular lender. They will sometimes, especially if you're looking at bonds, for instance, they will tell you what your debt service coverage ratio target should be. Again, there's a link at the bottom if you'd like to read a little bit more about this particular ratio. So can your system meet its short-term obligations? And the current ratio is a good way to look at that. So it looks at current liabilities as well as your unrestricted current assets. So again, we have a little bit more information. I believe that is a blog post that we have that talks a little bit about the current ratio and how it's applicable and how you can use it. This next one may seem a little bit unrealistic, but it is good to know. If there was some sort of natural disaster, let's say, if there was a hurricane, or somehow your billing system was disrupted and you could not bill your customers for a period of time, how long can you maintain operations and continue to provide service if you're not receiving any additional dollar coming in? And for that benchmark, we like to look at days cash on hand. A lot of these, it's difficult to say what is the best target for days cash on hand, for instance. And so what I'm about to say doesn't apply only to this particular ratio, it applies to a lot of them. But for example, if you happen to be in an area that's prone to natural disasters, then you should be probably looking at more days cash on hand than a system that is in a fairly stable environment where they don't expect too many natural disasters. But the days cash on hand lets you look at, again, how long you can operate the system without any additional funds coming in. The next concept is how much of your system's expected life has already run out, okay? Or how much more life you expect to get out of the system right now. Asset depreciation is one way to look at this, but you should bear in mind that this particular indicator is only as accurate as your depreciation schedule. So if you know that you haven't been paying a lot of attention or put a lot of time into depreciating your assets, then this ratio, you should take it with a grain of salt, okay? And even then, even if you are doing a good job with your depreciation schedule, historic pricing is likely to distort the results. But this is another important ratio when we're looking at benchmarking. So I went through that pretty quickly, and we'll see if we do want to go to that video later on in the webinar and look at it. But you may be asking yourself, where do I get the numbers to calculate some of these ratios? So in most cases, it was 2 numbers, maybe 3 or 4 numbers. What you do is you go to the financial statements. So what we call the CAFRAs, usually the Comprehensive Annual Financial Reports for the utility or the local government. And you can get most of these numbers off of there pretty easily. You should be able to get all of them if the report is sort of up to the standard and truly comprehensive. For non-government entities, you want to look at the balance sheet, the shareholder reports, etc. But it seems a lot of our folks are municipalities, so the local governments is where you would be looking. So the Environmental Finance Center at UNC has been helping utilities calculate some of these ratios and guiding them for a long period of time. And not so long ago, though, we realized that it would be nice to put all of this in one place. So if you do go to your CAFRA or your financial report and you try to calculate, let's say, the operating ratio first, you're looking at revenues. That's one of the 2 numbers that you need to calculate that ratio. But then some of the other ratios that I mentioned will also look at revenues. So in this case, you go through your financial reports, you find the revenues once, you put that in, and then it uses that number if it's needed in the following ratios. So basically, you get something that looks like this, you put some information in, and then you get something that looks like this, which is operating ratio that does not, this one includes depreciation, this one does not include depreciation, this one would be your debt service coverage ratio, and these are all over time. So if you have multiple years of information, you can put that in and it gives you sort of trend. This is your quick ratio, sort of liquidity, days cash on hand, and percent of capital assets depreciated. So we have developed this tool that's kind of a one-stop shop for a lot of these benchmarks. Just a little tip, when you do go download this Excel tool, like a lot of the tools that I will show you off of the EFC at UNC's website, they're just Excel files. So you have to download them onto your computer, and oftentimes they'll ask you to enable editing, and that should not cause you any IT problems, at least it hasn't so far. But the tool will not really work if you don't hit that button and enable editing. Just a little tip there. So you may be asking yourself, why this stuff? Well, you know, they say in terms of performance benchmarking, what does not get measured does not get improved. So the idea here is you can improve by comparing. You can compare the ratios or the benchmarks that your utility gets with other utilities benchmarks. Let's say you have a peer group of water systems, drinking water systems that you like to talk with, which is a really good practice, you know, communicate with and share tips and ideas. You can, in that little group, maybe your systems have certain similarities like the size or the geography. You can compare what some of these ratios look like. But probably more importantly is the idea of comparing yourself to yourself over time. So this sort of trend analysis here, you want to see what direction these lines are trending in over time. And so that's another reason to sort of calculate and do this, what we call financial health checkup for yourself, and just compare yourself that your utility is going in the right direction. Maybe you like some of the ratios when you first calculate them, but it gives you an idea of where you can make improvements for the future. But basically, besides your own utility and your staff and your decision makers caring about some of these ratios and the performance of the utility compared either to yourself over time or to other utilities, funders like the SRF program and even rating agencies care about these types of ratios. There is not a loan program out there that does not calculate or have targets when it comes to debt service coverage, for instance. And as you think also about the future needs of your system, it's important to know where you are starting from, where you're coming from. So, you know, Rome wasn't built in a day. We probably have to take baby steps in some cases, but let's make sure that we're heading in the right direction. And so measuring and comparing will help us to get there. So if we calculate these ratios, and if we were actually doing a one-day workshop, in-person workshop, part of the exercise would probably be to actually calculate the ratios. We ask systems to bring their financial statements to the classroom and calculate the ratios. So then at this point, we would sort of have an idea of where we are right now, currently. And then we want to talk about where we're going for the future and estimate the future costs and revenues for the system, the revenues that we want to generate, right? So there are two related concepts when we're talking about future planning, asset management and capital planning, that I want to talk about a little bit. So the idea here is to work smarter, not harder, when it comes to asset management. And there are different terms out there when it comes to utility management. You may have heard of effective utility management, for instance. That's another related concept to asset management, but it just means managing your system in a common sense way. So asset management is one framework to do that, and helps you to have the most impact in your system by spending your limited dollars. So none of us, I mean, if you're an exception, let me know, raise your hand and let us know. But most systems don't have an unlimited amount of funds. And so you want to be smart about how you spend the limited resources that you have. So our sister center, the Environmental Finance Center out west, based in New Mexico, they put together this way of developing an asset management program. So this is one framework for addressing asset management, and there are a couple others. Well, there are probably more than a couple others, but I'll mention one or two other examples. But we like to approach it this way: 5 core components of asset management. So you can look at the current, you need to look at the current rate of your, current state of your assets, sorry. You want to also look at the level of service. You want to pay attention to this concept of criticality, life cycle costing, and then ultimately long-term funding to drive your asset management program. So in terms of the current state of the assets, it's basic, like I said, common sense stuff. What do I own, and where are these assets that I own? Are they in good condition? So find some way to rate the condition of these assets. This question of how much useful life is remaining. And then what is it going to cost to replace the asset? Even if you happen to know what it costs to put the asset in the first place, that's probably not what it's going to cost you to replace that asset. And asset management, from my experience talking to systems, it can seem overwhelming. And so you kind of put off starting it. And really, that's the worst thing. Just start. There are going to be literally blank cells in your worksheet because you may not know where all the assets are, for instance, when you get started. You may not know how much useful life is remaining because maybe you don't even know when it was installed. There was somebody else working in the system then and they didn't record that kind of stuff. Go ahead, start with a worksheet, and I'll give you an example of what a spreadsheet can look like for asset management, and just fill in what you know. And over time, as you put new assets in, you will do a better job of recording this stuff. And the plan will take off from there, or the program will take off from there. But waiting until you have all of this in hand before you start is probably going to keep you from ever starting. Just a word of advice. Another of those 5 components was level of service. So you want to be really careful. You don't want to tell your customers, or you don't want to set unrealistic goals for your staff even. So right now you have, let's say, 100 breaks a month in your water system. You want to look at number of breaks and measuring a reduction in the number of breaks, or a reduction in the time that it takes to respond to those breaks. We are not going to go from 100 to 0 breaks per month. That's not realistic, and it sets your staff up to fail. And if you are doing a good job of sort of promoting and showing your decision makers what your asset management plan is like. They want to know how close you're getting to these targets. So you want to have realistic targets, okay? So reducing from 100 to 80 breaks per month and reducing the number of minutes or hours to respond to those breaks is one way to look at that. But try to be realistic, and you're going to set the goals or the targets to be measurable. So saying that we're going to respond to breaks faster is probably not specific enough. Try to put in the percentage time reduction or the number of minutes you plan to shave off of it. So again, you need to know what's happening now in terms of how long it's taking to respond to breaks so that you can look for ways to reduce that and improve. And in a lot of cases, it makes sense to involve the customers. So what would my customers want is a good question to think about when it comes to the level of service with asset management. Criticality is an important concept here. So what is the probability? There are two aspects to criticality: probability of something failing and the consequence of it failing, okay? How do my assets fail? What's the condition of my assets? So that looks at probability of failing. Cost of repair, are there legal consequences or environmental consequences or even social consequences to a particular piece of equipment failing? Are there redundant assets? So there are some cases where you need to have a backup or redundancy involved. This little diagram here I think is really useful in showing how to set up the criticality for your system. So there's on this vertical axis we have the consequence of failure, and on the horizontal axis we have the probability of failure. So items over here have a low chance of failing, and if they fail, the consequences are not too dire. Whereas over here, this is our high risk area. It's pretty likely that these assets will fail, and if they do fail, we have huge consequences to our system. So this is where we want to look at investing most of our time and resources, because again, we do not have the resources in most cases to address all of our assets equally, right? So we want to prioritize, and so this is the concept of looking at criticality in order to prioritize. This concept of life cycle costing and replacement of assets is pretty interesting. So in theory, there is this perfect time to replace an asset based on the cost of the asset, what's going to happen if it fails, all of that. There's this perfect spot. So in this case, the green arrow here is showing you the optimal replacement point. So this is time and condition. At this point before it completely fails, you replace it right there at this particular X. But in reality, to be practical, we don't know exactly when that optimal time is going to be to replace every single asset. So we have to hedge our bets a little bit. So we need to look at the concept of risk here. For high risk, we want to replace, if you have a high risk asset or piece of equipment, you want to replace that asset early. You want to do that replacement before it actually fails because of risk, okay? Looking at risk again, if there's a low risk, you can run the asset to failure and replace it afterwards because the consequences in this case are not particularly bad compared to the high risk. So that's one important aspect of asset management, is looking at risk and when to replace different pieces of equipment or assets. We're going to go on here to look at long-term funding. So now you have an idea of the assets in your system, where they are, how you might want to prioritize. But ultimately, we need some capital. We need some funding to put into our asset management program, okay? And before I leave this asset management concept, I wanted to show you guys this URL right here that will give you more information on these 5 components that we just talked about. So the Environmental Finance Center out of New Mexico, their framework. You can get more information there, and you can certainly contact us. We'll show you at the end actually how we have some opportunities for technical assistance through this project where we can directly help your one drinking water system with some of these kinds of projects that you might be trying to work on. So asset management is definitely one of them. So as we leave this related concept of asset management and long-term, we're going to talk about long-term capital planning. So a long-term capital plan is it's multi-year because it's long-term, of course. It's a document that looks at prioritizing capital projects. And also it looks at the funding sources or potential funding sources and timelines for these projects. So we want to identify regulatory deficiencies. So maybe you talk to an agency like EPA and look at what some of the proposed regulations may be. What's coming up? What's on the horizon? So, you know, for example, there's talk about emerging contaminants right now. Talk to folks or even consultants and look at this 10 to 20 year window if you could. What might be coming down the pipe that you need to look at planning for? You also want to look at expansion or growth needs over that time horizon and see if you need to be planning for some of those projects. You want to look at deferred maintenance problems. So maybe you took over the system from someone else and they have been putting off maintenance for a while, so there's some catching up to do. Or maybe the service has not been adequate. So that's something else that you need to play catch up on. And remember, a lot of the infrastructure is hidden, so it tends to be ignored, and so we want to prioritize that even if it's not very visible. Again, this idea of capital improvement planning and is related to asset management, and they go hand in hand in terms of looking at capital expenses in the long term over, like, again, a 20-year period. A capital improvement plan with a narrower timeline might be 5 years, and this one can be in more detail than your 20-year plan. Okay, we can have more specific projects, our costs can be a little bit more on point, and we can have a stronger or more firmer idea as to where the money will come from for the different projects. So when we even look at a shorter time frame, so 1 to 2 years, we want a capital improvement budget in this case. So it's more detailed, it's a narrower timeline, and we're actually committing funds. You want to get this document actually approved or adopted because, again, it's the near future, the very near future. This is the table that I mentioned before that shows what it's an example of a capital improvement plan or CIP. So you'll see over here on the left, it lists different pumps, for instance, high service pumps, and it has different columns talking about the years and the future and the total cost. So this is an example of where you start with a CIP and you kind of build off from there. And if there are blanks in there, if you don't know some of the information, you know, you just kind of move forward from there and fill in more and more as you go along. Some of the prices here may be tricky to find. So we recommend calling a vendor. Vendors are usually quite willing to speak to you on the phone, give you some information. You can call more than one vendor actually, or you can talk with other systems who may have done similar projects in the past. And you look at past expenses, but of course we need to adjust for increases in cost. What we paid for something 10 years ago is not what we're going to be paying to replace it, unfortunately, right? So, and that is because of this idea of inflation. So the Consumer Price Index is really the most common way that we hear about on the news every day for measuring inflation. It's a measure of the average change over time in prices, but the CPI, even though it's very common, the prices in this case are for an urban basket of goods. So it's looking at consumer goods and services like travel costs or bread. So the CPI, I would argue, doesn't really relate very well to what you are working on with drinking water systems. Really, the Construction Cost Index is another measure of inflation that may be more relevant. And in this case, it's the average price for labor and key construction materials, and they use 20 cities across the United States. It's done by an engineering group. And, you know, what we found, especially with the fairly recent economic recession, is that CPI and CCI do not track very well together. You can look here and see with the crash of 2008-2009, they diverged quite a lot from each other. So even though CPI is probably the lower hanging fruit and easier to access, we really encourage you to use something that's a little bit more relevant to the water infrastructure industry. How do you drive down the cost of your capital improvement program? So Again, we're not operating in an environment where we have unlimited access to resources, to funds. So maybe you have to eliminate some projects at first. Maybe you put some projects off for later on or defer them. Instead of replacing particular pieces of equipment or assets, we can sometimes get by with just repairing them or refurbishing them. In some cases, you can find a solution that's not engineer-based. It's not a non-asset solution. Also, an important concept is to consider collaboration and partnerships with neighboring systems. In some cases, you can drive down costs by buying, for example, buying chemicals in bulk with neighboring systems, and so you get a better price because you're buying larger quantities. In other cases, maybe you need to have someone come in and repair your tank, but if 3 or 4 systems in one geographic area hire the same tank diver to go in and check the tank or inspect it or repair it or paint it, then it could cost each of those systems a little bit less. It could be one trip for that diver and it could cost the system less. So there are lots of little ways to consider collaborating and partnerships with nearby systems. And then you should also reevaluate the water demands of your customers. We are seeing across the country that most systems are noticing that total demand is decreasing over time. So just think about, maybe there are projects you feel you need to put in the ground because you need to sell more water in the future, but that may not always be the case. So really look at your projections there and see how total demand is changing over time. And before we leave this area, wanted to remind folks that life cycle cost is important. And what I mean by life cycle costing is that purchase price of a piece of equipment or an asset is not equal to the total price. And so here you'll see this is something that was put together by Steve Albee with US EPA. And it's like an iceberg, right? He says capital investments are just the tip of the iceberg. So first you have the acquisition, or you actually get the asset. But over the life of that asset, you have to maintain it. And there's a cost involved with that. A couple times along the way, because again, these assets last, 20, 30, 40, 50 years in some cases, you'll have to refurbish it a couple times. And then when it really does reach the end of its useful life, there may be some costs involved with disposing of the asset. So when we look at it, the acquisition, which is what really comes to most of our minds when we think of an asset, just that acquisition piece of getting it in the first place, is only about 35 to 40% of the cost of the asset over time. So over 60% is usually stuff that doesn't usually normally come to our mind first, right? Refurbishing, maintenance, and disposal. So just think about that when you're thinking about capital planning, that acquiring the asset is not the end of the cost to your system in most cases. The next slide here is showing some software. This is the checkup program for small systems that was put together by EPA. And we see small systems, and usually some more medium-sized systems use this, but it is another framework for developing and maintaining an asset management program. So that's something that we recommend, and EPA has some resources if you're interested in using this particular software on how to use it, and they have tips and different calls ever so often to kind of exchange information on using this tool. So that's one piece of software for asset management. In terms of capital planning, I wanted to mention that the EFC at UNC has this resource webpage for capital planning in particular. So one of the things you will find on this resource page is a list of different components that can be part of your asset management, your capital plan. So we looked at several different documents, and you'll see the documents listed across the top here. And then we sort of cataloged those different documents. What were they saying that you should include in a CIP? So if you want to start off a CIP for the first time, you probably want to look at something, you want to pay more attention to the items that many different resources say are critical to include in a CIP. So that's one of the resources on this capital planning web page. And then we actually have another Excel-based tool that will let you develop a CIP for water and even for wastewater utilities. So this tool you can download through our website, and I'll show you kind of what it does here. This is what the tool results in. It summarizes your utilities capital needs in the next 20 years. And it kind of gives you ideas of the rate increases that you need to do in order to fully fund the capital projects based on debt and cash funding requirements. So that's a useful tool. It's free to download from the website. So we're kind of moving on here, but you know, whether you get a loan from the SRF program or some other program, you really need to repay the funds that you have borrowed, right? I'm sure Michael will back me up on that. They are interested in you repaying the money that you borrowed so that the system remains basically into perpetuity, where the money is coming back into the capital fund, and then they can make more and more loans to different systems. But at the utility level, really, you may be lucky to get a grant. Maybe there's a foundation in your community that really likes your drinking water system and you can get some funds there. But rates are really the heart of your revenue, okay? Some local governments also have a general fund with their parent government that would subsidize the water system. And that's not a recommended best practice, at least not over the long term. You really should be independent and you should be self-sufficient by setting rates that can pay the cost to run the system. So we did want to talk about rate setting for a few minutes on the webinar. When you set your rates, you want to ask yourself, will these rates that I'm looking at, or this rate structure, will it provide sufficient cost recovery for my system? And then you want to make sure you understand exactly what that term sufficient cost recovery means, what it includes. You want to be following applicable laws. So oftentimes states have some guidelines on the types, of rates that you should be setting. Some states encourage increasing block rates, for instance, because they are concerned about conservation. So you want to look at what the state laws may be for your system. You want to consider that you're allocating the cost to the right customers. So commercial customers versus residential customers, or industrial customers versus residential customers, for instance. Think about how you allocate those costs to the different customer groups in your community. You also want to consider that customers should be able to understand the rates that you're setting. The rate structure probably should not be so complicated that they can't understand it. And more than understanding the rates, it's one thing for them to understand them, but they need to be able to pay those rates. So affordability and income of the area that you're working in is also relevant. And then something that touches on policy and objectives for your community as a whole are, do these rates send the right signal to our customers based on our objectives? So if you are trying to encourage water conservation, but you sell water for really low prices, your rates are really low, then maybe you're not addressing that objective that you have of conservation. Another objective could be trying to attract new commercial entities. So you want employers to come to your area. So then you consider maybe subsidizing the residential rates, or I should say subsidizing commercial rates with your residential customers. So there are different considerations there. And then last but not least, will revenues be resilient to changing water demands? We're seeing that water demand is changing, especially out, in your part of the world, in Utah, and out west, further west. So how resilient are these rates to the changing water demands? And even if you're not experiencing some sort of drought or you have low annual rainfall levels, we're seeing that the per capita consumption of water is going down over time. There are external factors that are driving it. And so will your rates be resilient to that kind of thing, that kind of environment? And so we look at full cost pricing. We want to make sure that our rates let us operate and maintain our system. We want to look at taxes and accounting costs, contingencies for emergencies. We want to look at principal and interest for long-term debt, reserves for capital improvement, and in some cases, utilities are even looking at things like source water protection and including that as full cost pricing when they set their rates. So you want to set rates that cover the cost of all of these areas. A good practice is to actually write out your rate setting objectives and prioritize them. So these are probably all good goals, right? Encouraging conservation, full cost recovery, maintaining affordability, and fostering business-friendly practices. Some of them go very well together. So encouraging conservation, if you have a higher rate, if you set your rates a little bit higher, these two components are sort of easy to meet. But then you have to balance that with maintaining affordability for your systems. Okay, so it's good to actually write out these objectives in order. So rank them, in other words. We at EFC have this framework or elements of rate structure designs. So we want folks to look at their rates in terms of the customer classes and distinction. You probably shouldn't have just one rate for all your customers. You have very different customers, meaning commercial customers and residential customers. You want to look at your billing period. Usually monthly is the best billing period if your billing software can swing that. You want to look at the base charge. So that's the fixed price that you charge customers whether or not they used any water. So they could have gone away for a whole month, but they would still pay that base charge. And then in some cases, with that fixed price that doesn't change every month, there is some consumption allowed. 1,000 or 2,000 gallons we see often that are allowed, quote unquote, for free as part of the base charge. And then on top of that base charge, there's the volumetric rate structure. You want to look at the number of blocks, the block sizes, if you do have blocks involved, and the differentials between these different blocks or tiers. So you can have an increasing block rate or a decreasing block rate in some cases. Some utilities look at drought rates, so a special rate that kicks in when there is a declaration of a drought. And then how often you change your rates. We say that you should look at them at least once a year, even if you don't change them, but you should analyze them at least annually. Another important concept with rate setting and usually rate increases is that there is this relationship or interaction between rates and usage. So you set your rates based on your projected water use, but raising your rates lowers the water use. Okay, so when you charge a higher price for a product, usually people buy less. Water doesn't have too many substitutes. So the rule of thumb that we found is that if you change or you increase your water rates by 10%, you can expect water use to decline by about 3%. So somewhere in the range of 2 to 6 usually. So in other words, if you are planning a rate increase, you should do your revenue projections where you're expecting to sell a little bit less water per capita. Again, look at your rates annually, and then you may decide to change them or not. You can look at the financial health indicators annually, the ones that we showed earlier, and you can get them all in one place on that Excel tool that I demonstrated for you. And if you feel, some of us are operating in very politically charged climates where it's very difficult to go to the decision makers every year and ask for a rate increase, this is a little bit of an easier way to do it. Some might say it's a cop-out, but if you say that you're going to raise your rates every year based on some external factor like inflation, then it at least helps to take some of the politics out of getting at least a small rate increase from your board or your decision-making body. So I wanted to throw that tip in there. In terms of setting rates, we do have a water and sewer rates analysis model. That's really one of our most popular tools, and you can get it off the EFC website. The image that you're seeing there is the instructions for the tool and how you can find it. Then there are 2 data input screens, and this is one is showing you just a screen capture of what kinds of data you're putting in. And then the result here is, in Excel, you'll get a fund balance under the existing rates that you're charging at your utility right now, and a different fund balance under the rates that you're proposing. So you're playing around within this tool. And both projections are for the next 20 years. So it lets you look way into the future at how your revenues will look with the rates that you're considering. And it helps make the case sometimes that you do need a rate increase, because when you can't meet some of your needs with the existing rate structure, it kind of lays that out in a chart on this diagram, on this tool. So at this point, we wanted to take a quick look at the website, so you can see where some of the tools that we're talking, well, not the tools yet, but how you can access some of the Division of Drinking Water's information. So here I typed in the URL that you see there, that you saw on your screen. And we can poke around in here. You have everything from some administrative background on the project. So most of these links take you to lower down the page. And here you can see Michael's phone number, and if you click on this, it'll take you to his email. The intended use plan, I'll open it in a new tab, is a very detailed document. This is the 2016 version. You can get lots of good information in this document. Let's see. So the reason we wanted to show you where to access this stuff yourself is that, you know, for example, the schedule that we showed, that table, that is the current schedule. But if you're looking at 2017 or 2018 funds, you need to know where to get this information. So the best place would be the website. This talks about the Drinking Water Board. It has application stuff on there. And it tells you, like, appearing before the board, what happens after the board has authorized stuff. The closing gives you more information about DBE, which used to be called Women and Minority-Owned Businesses. You can get information on that there. And I'll see if, Michael, is there any particular thing you want me to click on here to demonstrate?
Not necessarily. I think that it would probably be better for them to just kind of get on there and look around and see what they can find, and find things that interest them individually.
Great. Okay, well, one that I was particularly liking with the capacity assessments worksheet. So that's also available from this website. Let's see how I got that. I think I clicked on, let's see, was it the application process? And here we go. These capacity assessment worksheets. And this is what it looks like. Whoops. Pull it back up again. Bless you. So you can pull it up in Excel or PDF. And this is stuff that I believe you can kind of fill out, save, and send in. So
That's
sort
correct.
of an interactive form. You can, you know, click on things in here and fill it out that way. So it's not as daunting as it could be, because a lot of the information, it is asked for considerable amounts of information, but you can do it via checkboxes in most cases. So I think that's pretty appealing. And then you can submit the form by email or print it, and then I guess send it in that way in hard copy. So I wanted to show you those things. And that timeline document is also available off of this website. So I'm going to pop back into the PowerPoint here. That was our quick tour of the website. We want to continue. So we encourage you guys, again, to look around there, see if you can find answers to some of the questions that may come to your mind after the webinar, and then definitely feel free to reach out to folks if you have more specific questions that you can't find answers to. And as promised, we wanted to have Michael and Ken's information available for you through the webinar. And we'll make these slides available to you afterwards. Savannah's going to go through that when she wraps things up in the end here. But Savannah, do you want to head into the polling questions, or should we look at some more Q&A at this point?
Yeah, we did receive 2 more questions that I think would be good to follow up with.
Okay.
So the first one is that an attendee is from a not-for-profit hospital looking to drill 2 water wells as a backup water source. Is this something that could be funded through the SRF program?
Yes, it is. We've actually worked with a couple of other non-profit type hospitals on some projects in the past. So yes, that is something that we could help them with.
That's great news. And as a little follow-up to that, it was mentioned a little earlier in the presentation that there was a 20% that the state will match on the program, is that 20% that the state will match also a loan?
Yeah, I'll let Michael chime in afterwards. And so I think that was when we were talking about how the state revolving fund for drinking water at the national level operates. So I was kind of giving you guys sort of the bird's eye view of how the program runs. So each state is supposed to pitch in 20% in order to get the other 80% of the capitalization grant, if you will. So once that 20 and the 80 get together at the state level, there may be some set-asides that the state can take off. So there is an administrative set-aside, for instance. Obviously, you require folks at the state level to administer the program and to run it. And so there are costs involved in that. And so each state can take off a certain percentage of the funds for that. And then there are some set-asides for technical assistance. There are other options to set aside some funds for specifically small system technical assistance or help. And then once those what we call set-asides are taken off sort of off the top of the whole capitalization fund, then the bulk of it, the rest of it, is available for low interest loans to drinking water systems in the state. So hopefully I clarified that there, but I wanted to see, Michael, if you have more to chime in there, feel free to do that.
Yeah, just by way of example, and I'll pick some round numbers here. Let's say that Utah's capitalization grant for the next year is $8 million from EPA. What that 20% state match means is that we then, from our state fund, that $3.5 million that we get from the state sales tax revenue, we then take $1.6 million of that and put that into the fund, into the body of the fund that we then turn around and provide as loans. So it's not necessarily that we loan that directly to the water systems or buy their bonds with that. At that point, it just becomes part of the whole fund that we use throughout the year.
Yeah, that's a great explanation. And so I am looking for a more pleasant term for this, but the match is kind of considered putting some skin in the game. So the state is showing that, they value these projects in this program, and they're going to put some, of the state's own money up to help capitalize the program itself.
Right.
Good. Well, Savannah, do we have any other questions that you want to ask right now, or should we move on?
That is all the questions we have for right now.
Okay, perfect. Well, we will stay open here for a couple more minutes, but I want to encourage you guys to go ahead and if you have other questions, to put them in, and we'll see if we could accommodate them. And if we don't have time for all the questions or to answer all the questions, like Savannah mentioned at the beginning, then we will try to follow up with you afterward. But I will say that if you have a question, you're probably not the only one with that particular question. So other folks are probably wondering the same thing. Okay, so I'm going to move ahead here. And Savannah's going to run us through a couple more polling questions. Well, Savannah, let's see. I can give folks a quick tour of the EFCN website where they can find some of the tools that I was talking about. Is this a good time to do that before you run the poll?
Yes, let's run through that.
Okay, perfect. We were worried about time on this webinar, but we did very well, I think. So if you go to EFCN, where the N is the first letter in the word network, efcnetwork.org, it brings you to the big project webpage, where, as Savannah talked about in the beginning, the EFC network, so all the different EFCs together, are working on this national project where we're doing a training like this, or even an in-person one in each state and territory. We have a couple other things that I'd like to show you on this. So this is, everybody on the webinar today has seen this. I'm guaranteed, because that's where you signed up for the webinar, unless somebody else did it for you, okay? So you can always look to see where the upcoming workshops and webinars are. In this case, you would have gone here and signed up upcoming events probably for the webinar today, or the link in the email that you got would have taken you to the Utah webinar event. After today, it's going to be part of the past events. So you can go there and you can scroll through and look for today's event. And we will post a recording of the webinar on this website, and we will post also sort of a 5-page summary describing some of the tools. And then eventually we're putting together a longer sort of manual that summarizes what we talked about today. Actually, in some areas it won't summarize, it would actually add more details, right? So we'll pull together all those resources for you in one place, and that's also going to be available on this website. But Savannah showed you in the beginning, for instance, if we go to the home page, you can look at resources. If you are interested particularly in developing a capital improvement program, so your boss has told you by the end of the year, I want to see a CIP for our utility, then you go to Resource Library and you'll be able to find different sections, and you can learn more about that particular need that your utility has. This is also where Savannah pulled up that table. So I know we have folks on the line besides actual utilities. We actually have a very good mixture of actual drinking water utilities as well as some consulting or engineering firms who work with the utilities, and we have some a couple of folks from Rural Water as well as the Rural Community Assistance Corporation on the webinar today. But if you are interested in finding that table that Savannah showed us, this is how you do it. So you click on Utah and a table will come up with some information. We also have, so this is where, Michael's name is listed here and his contact information. And we actually have a couple other funders from different programs on the webinar today. But that's one resource to show you sort of live, even though Savannah had some nice screenshots of it. The blog will take you to, again, if you're trying to do asset management, you can go here and read more about that particular topic. But a really cool tool is assistance. I shouldn't say a tool, but an opportunity here is to request assistance. So we are doing these sort of generic workshops like this webinar for the state of Utah, but one can also go and ask for a few hours of specific help for your actual individual utility in one of these areas. So you put in a few pieces of information and we'll contact you and try to get you that assistance. Now the clock is ticking on this, at least for this round of the project. We only have, I think, a few more slots of technical assistance that we can provide or that we have in our budget. So feel free to use that to let us know if there's a particular area that we can help your individual utility. And I think those are the main things I wanted to show you on the EFCN website. And then some of the tools that I mentioned, the Excel-based tools, may be easier to find on the EFC at UNC's website. If you go to resources on our website and tool, you're not interested in the South Carolina water and wastewater dashboard, but you can go in and look at rates, model, let's see if that brings anything up. And it will give you this setting water rates using a free Excel-based model. This is actually a webinar on the tool. This one, so that's an hour and a half of a webinar showing you exactly how to use the tool and talking more about it. This one will let you actually download, let's see, I believe this link here will let you download the tool itself in Microsoft Excel. So you can look around there. If your community has some issues with affordability, for instance, you can type that word in there, and there are a couple of affordability tools that we have as well that I didn't talk about today, but you can access them this way. Okay, so on the EFC at UNC's website, there is so much stuff that the best thing to do is use this search button, and it'll help you find the resources that you're looking for, hopefully. And you have our contact information as well. You can always contact us directly with a specific question. But those were the two or three, I guess, main websites that I wanted to show you guys and give you the opportunity to request technical assistance from the EFCN one. Okay, so the EFC network. Again, that's how you do that, request assistance.
As a nice
All right.
follow-up, Stacy, I did just receive a question that asked, when will the state of Utah be updating their application schedule and where can we look for it?
Okay. Michael, you can take that one. I will try to find it online.
Yeah, the schedule for next year will be approved by the board at our board meeting this coming Friday, and it will then be on the internet on our web page within a week or two after that authorization and approval. And if you look at, if you go to board,
okay.
I'm trying to point on my screen here, it doesn't quite work.
You mean, okay. Yeah, that is tip.
Yeah, right there. Click on
On the left.
The board.
Okay.
And then drinking water board. Application deadlines. That first one there, the first link. Click on that one. Yep, that's the 2016, and that's where the 2017 schedule will be as soon as it's approved by the board.
Very good. So I'm going to go back here a couple times. This is unrehearsed, folks, right? We didn't plan this ahead of time. But if you're on the main page, boards, oops, the drinking water board, one more time, I'll show it, and then the deadlines will be here. So that's going to be changing very soon. That's a great question, very relevant. All right, Savannah, should I hand back over to you now?
So we do not have any more questions. So at this time, I would like to send the audience through very quick 2 more polling questions. And the first one is if attendees would like to subscribe to the Environmental Finance Center blog. If you want to sign up for the blog but do not have the opportunity to submit your polling answer today, you can always sign up for the blog on the efcnetwork.org website. The lovely website that Stacy gave us a step-by-step how to find everything. And the next polling question is about technical assistance. If you are a small water system of 10,000 or fewer people served, if you would be interested in receiving in-depth technical assistance. And again, if you are unsure about technical assistance or do not have the opportunity to submit your polling answer today, please review the technical assistance form on our efcnetwork.org website. And I'm going to be closing that poll in 3, 2, 1. And finally, in the chat box, I am sending out a link for a survey for today's webinar. And if you have a chance, please take some time to tell us your thoughts. It will take no more than 5 minutes. The link to the survey will also be in the follow-up email that comes out tomorrow, and as well as the link to the slides and recording that you can reach at the efcnetwork.org website. But again, please allow a week for the processing and posting of these materials. And we still have some time. If you have any final questions, please shoot them in and we can get them answered. Thank you, Stacy, Michael, and Ken so much for your thorough presentation this afternoon. I forget I'm Eastern time. Michael or Stacy, do you have any last minute things to tell our attendees before we officially wrap up?
I'm good. I think we do have a slide coming up, Savannah, that would show them, exactly where they'd get the manual. But besides that, I think we're good. Michael?
Nope, I have nothing more. Thank you.
All right. So that link on the slide right now is critically important for you to receive the slides and the manual. It will contain all the information that was discussed today, plus a little bit more.
And I will just take a second here, Savannah. This is Stacy, to thank Michael and Ken with the state of Utah. This was a little bit different in that, since we were focusing on the SRF program in that state, Michael has stepped up to the plate and gotten very involved, obviously, in the presentation materials and presenting on the webinar today. And I know Ken gave up some with me time for the webinar, so we appreciate him giving up some time on this important day. But they were great to work with, and obviously had to get very involved in the materials here, and they, I think, really rose to the occasion. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
And now, Stacy, will this link to the slide in the manual be available on our EFCN network website?
Yes, so it will be available on that link that we have there right now on the screen, efcnetwork.org/events, Webinar Navigate Utah's SRF program. And we will try to email out. So as Savannah mentioned, I think automatically as part of the overall project, you get sort of a survey that will take just a few minutes, or a follow-up email, I guess. I think you get that tomorrow. But we are going to put together materials, including some of the questions that you guys asked on the webinar today. We'll put together a manual with a Q&A section, maybe a short Q&A section, and listing and describing all of the EFC tools that we mentioned. And we will include that as part of what is going to come out following up the webinar. So you will get a link or an email with a link probably in a week or more with that manual. But we'll also try to put it on this long URL that you see on your screen right now. So we'll try to find a couple different ways to get that out there, and we'll talk to the state too. Maybe it's something they want to put on the state website eventually. So there should be a couple different ways to access the manual that we're talking about.
Thank you so much. All right. I have not received any new questions at this point. Stacy, do you want to put up your contact information in case anybody would like to contact you specifically?
Yeah, so I want to say thanks to the audience. You guys were great. Lots of folks joined the webinar today, and we had some really good questions that helped us to probe a little bit further. So this is my contact information. I'm also on Twitter and Skype if you're into those kind of social media. And yeah, that's basically the end of the slideshow there. Thanks again for your time and attention this afternoon.
And I just want to say thank you again one more time to both Ken, Michael, and Stacy for being here today to host this extremely critical, important webinar. It was extremely thorough. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here.
Great, and I see that link, Savannah, in the chat area, the question area that folks can click on and answer the survey.
Perfect.
So remind you to do that. Okay, thanks everyone. Have a great afternoon.